I'd like to thank Isaac and the Heartland Institute and Joe Bast for having me here. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you. Seeing many people I've worked with and have known for many years, meeting new people, seeing people from Europe, from England, Germany, France. It's great to be here, and I really value the chance I've had to work with many of you and get to know you and make friends with you. Someone told me right after the election, a reporter said, well, you really got lucky with Trump, didn't you? And, you know, in fact, it's the people in this room and people like you around the country and at our allied groups, Heartland, CFACT, IER, Junk Science, we could go down the list, who have made this possible by working for decades, many of you without pay. See, I get paid for what I do, not a lot, but I do, and thanks for those coupons, Joe. You know, it's the people who've worked persistently against global warming alarmism that made this election result possible. And it was, if you recall, there have only been 2 elections, well, 2.5, that have turned on climate issues. In 2000, Al Gore lost the election because he lost West Virginia, and that was due entirely because someone named Buck Harless put in the mailbox of every voter in West Virginia a study that he had commissioned from university professors showing the impact on the coal industry and West Virginia's economy of Al Gore's policies. West Virginia was a reliable, it was originally a Republican state, but it became a very Democratic state during the Depression. And it was a reliable Democratic state up until Al Gore. Now it's once again a reliable Republican state. So that was the first election. The second was 2010 after cap and trade. The Waxman and Markey bill narrowly passed the House, and as a result, 20-some Democrats lost their seats and the House went Republican. So this is the third election that climate, because Al Gore never brought it up in 2000. John Kerry never brought it up. It was never an election issue in the presidential election until this year, when both candidates had very clear policies. And moreover, it wasn't just Donald Trump. The other Republican candidates, maybe not quite as forcefully or as clearly, were against the Obama climate agenda. For example, in September of 2015, Marco Rubio said that whatever came out of the Paris Climate Conference, he would submit it to the Senate. And after the Paris Climate Conference, Ted Cruz said, if I'm elected, it's dead. I like Marco Rubio's approach better, but you can see that there was a lot of support in the Republican Party for opposing the Obama climate agenda. So I don't think we got lucky. I think a lot of people did a lot of work, many of you very selflessly for a long time, and now we have a chance to undo some of the damage that has been done. Donald Trump did not have a huge policy apparatus in his campaign, as I think you're aware, but he did give a number of policy speeches. He said, the federal government cannot go on the way it is. It requires fundamental transformation. And that sort of turned into, during the general election, the drain the swamp. The swamp must be drained. He made a number of promises on energy, climate, and environment. If you add them all up, it's about 42 or 43. And when I was asked to lead the transition team on the EPA in early September of last year, I was told the purpose of the transition is to take these commitments and figure out how to translate them into policy and then how to implement them. And I want to say, just as an aside, I was allowed to pick my own team, and I picked some great people, including Steve Malloy. And there's some others in the room. I think Harlan Watson is here. David Kreutzer, I know, was here yesterday. David Stevenson is back there somewhere. And my colleague at CEI, Chris Horner, I'm not sure if he's left, but he's been around. Is there anybody I'm missing who's been attending who was on the transition team? Okay. Well, anyway, I think we did great work. Well, you just have to trust me on that. I mean, you don't really know. What we did was confidential, and we produced an advisory document that has no official status. It's an official document. It has the title page says Donald J. Trump Transition Team, but it's confidential, so I can't tell you what's in it. But I can tell you that, Trump made promises. The purpose of the transition was to implement the promise, figure out how to implement them. So here's what they are. Withdraw from Paris, defund the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, reopen the Endangerment Finding, withdraw the climate rules, the power plant rules, the methane rules. And on the energy front, there's a whole lot of specific promises about, and these weren't part of my team, these were Interior, freeing up energy production on federal lands and offshore areas. You add all these up, and this changes the entire direction of the country. So we did get lucky, I hope. Now, these commitments, I want to say, where are we? When President Trump gave his speech to Congress a few weeks ago, he started out by saying, here are the commitments that I've already fulfilled. And he went down the list. And it's pretty impressive how quickly he has moved to implement some of these commitments, although despite some of the chaos that has surrounded the White House. But we do have a problem. Swamp creatures are still there. They are trying to infiltrate the administration, and some of them are succeeding. The climate industrial complex has a huge amount of money at stake, and therefore they are willing to spend a huge amount of money to keep their mandates and subsidies and handouts. So this is not going to be easy. You can say, well, President Trump can just sign these things, but there is a lot of opposition, and a lot of it is very powerful opposition. The other problem, I think, that's already become clear in the Trump administration is the personnel problem. He got his cabinet picks done in good time, and now there just haven't been these second and third tier appointments. What's holding them up? Well, I'm not sure, but it's been reported that he's got 20 people in his presidential personnel office, and previous administrations at this point had 80 to 110 people working on presidential appointments. Now, you see, this goes back to the campaign, because they were sure that they won the campaign with 80 people in Trump Tower, and Hillary had 900 people in Brooklyn, and so it shows you don't need all these people. But in fact, to vet people and get them appointed, it takes a lot of time. So I think that's one problem. I think Steve had the slide on Mick Mulvaney saying we need 31% less funding for EPA next year, and 12% for Interior less, and 6% for energy. I don't know how did energy get away with that? Anyway, so 31%, that's a huge number. It will require getting rid of, eliminating 3,200 positions out of 14,700. Well, I know some people who are going to oppose that. If there are any in this room, stand up, and you can. No. Look, Congress likes to spend money, and the people on the Appropriations Committee really like to spend money, because that's where their power and influence comes from. And the EPA employees are tied in tight with the appropriators. And so to downsize the agency, and remember, President Trump said during the campaign more than once that he hoped to abolish the agency. He'd like to abolish it. Well, 31% is a good start, isn't it? First year. But it's going to be a huge fight in Congress to get programs eliminated. Mick Mulvaney has listed about 50 programs at EPA that he would like to eliminate. And we may not agree with all of those. I mean, some of those we can debate the details. But I think what we shouldn't debate is that we need a huge cut at the EPA. The reason EPA is on a regulatory rampage is because they have a lot of regulators. Let's reduce the number of regulators. So I think my first action item for you all is tell your members of Congress, tell your senators you want to cut the EPA budget, you like Mick Mulvaney's 31% cut, and try to do it. And publish things and write things and show, let's get on the moving here and support this agenda. Don't just assume it's going to happen because the White House has made a budget request. The second action item I have for you involves the Paris Agreement, the Paris Climate Treaty, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The promise that President Trump made was to withdraw from Paris and defund the UN Framework to defund UN climate programs, and that includes the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So there is, as you know, I think you've all read, that there is a huge amount of controversy within the administration. Secretary Rex Tillerson thinks it's really nice to be able to go to international meetings and pal around with his fellow foreign ministers. And it's nice for all those State Department people to fly around the world several times a year to these subsidiary body meetings of the UN Framework Convention. Well, I mean, Rex Tillerson may be from Texas, and he may have been CEO of Exxon, but he's part of the swamp. And I'm sorry to say that we've heard that the president's daughter and son-in-law also support staying in Paris. And I don't know that they really want to be identified as swamp creatures, and I'm not going to do so. But I do think that at some point it needs to be pointed out to President Trump and his administration that the people who elected Donald J. Trump are not wealthy Manhattanites, including his children. So you need to get on the ball here. You need to let people know. You need to be publishing. We must get out of the Paris Agreement because these things are all connected. If we don't get out of Paris, and I think we need to get, as Steve said, we need to get out of the UN Framework Convention. That's the easiest way out, and it does the most good because then we don't need to fund it anymore. If we don't get out of Paris, the environmental groups are going to go to court and say, you can't withdraw the power plant rules, you can't withdraw the methane rules, you can't withdraw the heavy truck rules, because these are part of an international commitment that we have accepted. So if the President and the Congress don't give any evidence that they don't accept this commitment, then we're going to get stuck with them. And moreover, if we don't withdraw from Paris, if President Trump does not take back President Obama's invalid acceptance of the treaty and then send it to the Senate for ratification, this sets a huge and terrible precedent for future multilateral environmental agreements. Because John Kerry said, when he was Secretary of State a couple of years ago, said we'll never have another Senate treaty. We'll never have another environmental treaty. They'll all be these magical executive agreements. Every other country in the world thinks Paris is a treaty, except the United States. So, let me conclude with one further action item, and that is the endangerment finding. You heard Pat Michaels yesterday give an incredible summary of how we get out of it and why. And Steve said we have to do it. I agree. President Trump committed during the campaign to reopen the endangerment finding. I think it is absolutely critical to the future policy that we redo and reopen and undo the endangerment finding. Because if we don't, it's going to be very hard to just say we're done with all of these climate rules. Because the environmental pressure groups are going to go to court and they're going to say, no, you can't really take back that rule because it's an essential part. Once you have ruled that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases endanger public health and safety, you can't take these things back. We have to do everything possible. So you need to contact your members of Congress, and you need to make noise, and particularly the scientists here, that the endangerment finding needs to be reopened. President Trump said he would do it. I know the problem right now, I think, from news reports, is that there is pushback from a lot of lawyers. Scott Pruitt, the EPA administrator, is a lawyer, and it's my understanding that he's taking advice from other lawyers in the Federalist Society who are saying, oh, it's too much work and you don't really need to do it. Lawyers are not here to tell you you can't do things. Lawyers are here to tell you how to do the things you want to do legally. So we have too many lawyers in Washington. They're part of the swamp, and I think what we need to do is to say, President Trump made these commitments. They are very closely connected. They form a coherent body of thinking about turning this country around by turning its energy and climate policy around 180 degrees from what we've seen under the Obama administration. This is possible, but we can't settle for half measures here. We have to get the whole package if we're going to succeed. And finally, I'll just make one more point. President Trump can do a lot of this stuff through executive actions and regulatory actions. We need to get Congress involved to make some of these things permanent by legislation. And Lamar Smith talked about that yesterday, passing his 2 very important science reform bills. We need to get Congress to say, these changes are not going to be reversed by the next president through executive action, because we have passed a law that says you can't do it. So beyond, really tell your congressman what you think, and your senator. Tell them that this has to be done. This is part of turning the country around. This is what we've been fighting for decades, and I believe we now have an incredible chance to get it done. Thank you.